Welcome to Phoenix Books in beautiful downtown Burlington. We are here on this evening with James Tabor, who has just published his second novel. It's called Frozen Solid. It's a thriller set in Antarctica. Today felt like Antarctica here in Burlington. It was pretty cold for April. Jim has a long history with Phoenix Books. We've done many events with him from his first book, which was called Blind Descent, which is an amazing book. I highly recommend it to all of you. It's about the deepest caves in the earth. His first novel was set in that world of the caves. That was called Deep Zone, and that came out a couple years ago. It's been very popular. This new novel is a thriller. It'll keep you glued to the page. You're going to have to finish it before you go to bed. If you buy it tonight, we encourage you to do so. And we're really happy to have James Tabor here for the launch of this fabulous book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks to all of you for coming out on this warm spring night. You know, it's and thanks to Phoenix for hosting me once again. Independent bookstores are just a pet thing of mine. I love indie books. I love indie bookstores. I've been all around the country touring for other books, and the indies just do such a great job. So I always just try to say a little word on their behalf. How many people have been to Antarctica here? No, okay. How many people have read, and the book is just out, but how many people have read the book yet? No, good, okay. So let me back up a little bit. These novels, a series of novels, feature a microbiologist named Hallie Leland, who is 31 years old. She has a PhD in microbiology from Johns Hopkins, and she works for kind of a shadowy government entity in Washington called BARDA, B-A-R-D-A. Now this is something that really exists. It stands for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. And it was created in 2004 by President George W. Bush to counter the threats from bioterrorism. So Hallie is a microbiologist who works for them. She's multi-talented because she's a highly expert technical diver, climber, mountaineer, extreme caver, and a couple other things. So because of all those skills, she's a field investigator. And because of those skills, she gets sent to some very strange places. The novels that I write, I hope, take readers to extreme settings that they may have been able to visit themselves, and that I myself have been to largely because of my nonfiction writing career. I became a mountain climber, a scuba diver, a rock climber, a caver. I was a cop. I didn't do that for writing, but I was a cop for a while in Washington, D.C., so I learned about law enforcement. So Hallie gets these wonderful assignments, depending on your definition of wonderful. The first one took her into one of the deepest caves on Earth down in Mexico. That was the Deep Zone. And the other thing that my novels feature is each one of them kind of revolves around a genuine threat to the planet, real science. So in the Deep Zone, it was the threat of pandemic caused by multiple drug-resistant bacteria, which is a very, very real thing. It's scarier, in fact, my research scared me a lot, than most people realize. The planetary threat in Frozen Solid is actually overpopulation, the global threat presented by overpopulation. And in the novel, Hallie's nemeses are a group of legitimate scientists who decide on their own that governments will never, ever solve the overpopulation problem before it sinks us. So these are good men, somewhat misguided, who have the capability to do something to curb overpopulation, and they decide to go ahead and do it. And the laboratory from which they're going to work is the Amundsen Scott Research Station at the South Pole. So that's kind of the setup for the story. The South Pole is such a strange place. And I think I do a pretty good job of evoking it in the book. Kirkus Reviews said that actually the South Pole was really the star of the book, and it's more so than the human characters. But because it is such a strange place, I brought a few slides, and I want to show those first, and then I'll do some reading, and then we'll talk, which is, for me, is the best part of these things. So let me see if I can get this open here. Okay. So, cover of the book. Interesting little story behind this, and this tells you about how publishers and authors work. That's what I wanted to have be the cover there. They had decided on a title, Frozen Solid, and I thought, well, and there are people who freeze solid in the novel, so I thought, God, that would be really an eye-catcher. That's not a human, by the way. It's a mannequin created by a special effects studio in Hollywood. So this is the Amundsen Scott Research Station at the South Pole in Antarctica. The little cluster of buildings up on top are what are called Jamesways, and workers and technicians and people who do summer work live there, but all the scientists and the uppity-ups and people live in the central station right down there, which was completed in 2004. It looks kind of like a nice, cozy, little enclave, not a bad place to live. But then you see it in that perspective, and it's a bit different. And in fact, that station is the most remote human habitation on Earth, on the highest, driest, windiest, coldest continent on the planet. To put it in perspective for you, the average temperature on the surface of Mars is minus 80 Fahrenheit. In winter, the average temperature there is minus 100 Fahrenheit. And for 8 months a year, it is totally isolated. There are no flights in, no flights out. So after what they call winter flyout, if you're there for 8 months. You don't get out, and nobody gets in. Being at the pole does strange things to people. Before this man came to the South Pole, his name was Dr. Rodney Marks. And he has a PhD in biochemistry, and he was a professor in New Zealand, if memory serves right. So then he came to the South Pole, and he spent a year, and he ended up dyeing his hair purple, taking a lot of drugs, getting very strange, and eventually died, very mysteriously. Nobody to this day knows how he died, even though it happened in 2004.
While he was there?
While he was there. So his death actually was one of the inspirations for the novel, because his death was very mysterious, has not been solved, if you will, to this day, partly because the National Science Foundation, the FBI, the State Department won't cooperate with the New Zealand police. There's a lot of mystery surrounding that. And one of the few people in a position to know how he died fell off an Antarctic ship 2 weeks later in the middle of the night. So very strange. This is one of the inside halls of the Pole Station. When they were building it, some human performance psychologist genius thought that those color patterns would help ward off depression in the wintertime. And in fact, they drive people nuts. People hate that because you're stuck there with 8 months a year. And that's some of the more tame wall decorations. Some of the others look like mad kindergartners painted the walls. There's a whole other world underneath the station at South Pole. It's called the Underground. And it's carved passages and chambers and rooms like this that over the years have been created for storage, for utility conduits. There's also a morgue. When somebody dies, they put them in there until they can get them flown out. So I told you that staying at Pole does weird things to you. That young man is flying out after a winter at Pole, and he probably came down fairly normal like Rodney Marks, but nobody leaves Pole unchanged. What's wrong with him? It's called Pole-itis. Just a lot of isolation, no light, bad food, exhaustion, hard, dangerous work, kind of wears you down. One of the things that Hallie does in the book, which is really done there, is scuba diving subglacially under the ice. And to get down to what are called cryopegs, which are subglacial bodies of water, they bore holes like that with actually heated lasers. And these giant, giant smooth-walled shafts take you down to that. So that's probably about a 35-foot circular shaft with that ladder down there. And these divers are lucky because they're diving during the summer when there's enough ambient light. But the closer you get to winter, the darker and darker and darker it gets. And pretty soon it's like diving in a cave eventually. And yet there's a third world at the pole. It's called Old Pole. The original facility was built in 1957 by the U.S. Navy, carved out of the ice underground 5 feet deep. Well, it's now 35 feet under the ice because of the accumulation. And it's totally abandoned. So there's this whole ghostly network of rooms and hallways and chambers and things down under the pole. Strictly forbidden to go there. If you go there and get caught, you're fired and flown right out. Polies love it. They go there every chance they get. They get to go down there, they drink, they take drugs, they have parties. And so that's one of the passageways in the old pole. You can see the ceiling is getting ready to collapse there. It's an astonishingly dangerous place. That's a ceiling timber. It's probably about 2-foot timber there, which is cracking under the weight on top of it. And then I want to end with this. This is the capital of Bangladesh, not necessarily at rush hour. It's called Dhaka, just like mid-morning. And that's what it looks like. And the scientists in the books, who are the bad guys, but they're really sort of good guys, they're afraid that in 50 years, the whole world is going to be like this. That is what motivates them. So, what do I think? I don't think governments are going to have the wherewithal to do much to really stop the overpopulation problem. I think that there have been a number, in my research I found a number of authoritative reports which suggest that we've already hit what they call, I believe it's overreach, which means we're at a point beyond which it's going to be very difficult to curtail the population impacts of the globe. So I'm glad I'm not 5 years old right now, you know, because I'll be exiting this world before all those horrible things happen. Let me do a couple readings, and then we'll talk. So, so Hallie lands. She comes in on a C-130, and she lands at the Iceway, as it's called, because these are all ski planes. And she's brought into the station, and the first place she wants to go is to the dining hall because she's hungry, she's thirsty, she's dehydrated. So this is her introduction to the South Pole. The U.S. Navy dug the first South Pole station out of solid virgin ice in 1957. Buried 30 feet deep now, that original facility, called Old Pole, still survived. So did some vestiges of naval tradition. Thus, the current station's cafeteria was a galley. By any name, it was like the dining hall in a big high school or penitentiary. One open rectangle, redolent of fresh floor wax and old grease, crammed with scarred green tables and chairs, and buzzing at lunchtime. The kitchen and serving line were in the back. In a fit of festivity, someone had once strung multicolored Christmas lights from the ceiling. Most were burned out now, and the wires hung down like thick green cobwebs. "How is South Pole food?" Hallie asked the person next to her in the cafeteria line. "Ever been in prison?" Before Hallie could say not yet, a red-haired woman in a lab coat stood up too quickly, knocking her chair over backward. She was clamping a wad of paper napkins to her face, trying to stanch a bad nosebleed. Blood quickly soaked the makeshift compress, ran down the skin of her hands and pale wrists, and dropped in radish-sized spots onto her white lab coat. For a few minutes, nothing more happened. Then the woman's eyes bulged and her chest convulsed. She coughed out a thick, red stream, took a step, stumbled, her mouth thrown open, blood spewing. She staggered, knocking over chairs, grabbed for a table. Blood kept pouring out, splashing the front of her lab coat, splattering tabletops. People scrambled away. She fell over backward. Her head hit the floor with a sharp crack. A PA system boomed. "Code blue in the galley! Code blue in the galley! EMTs to the galley!" Somebody called comms, the woman said next to her said. A heavy man in black coveralls knelt beside the woman. He put his face close to feel for breath, shook his head, and began performing chest compressions. Another man knelt by her head with a mask-style ventilator, but there was too much blood flowing to use it. 2 EMTs in blue jumpsuits burst into the galley. They suctioned the woman's airway, then went to work with a ventilator bag and defibrillator. After 10 minutes and 4 sets of shocks, the instrument's computerized voice droned, "Victim not responding." The EMTs rocked back on their heels. "She's gone," one said. So that's Hallie's first hour at the pole. And things get messier from there. I mentioned that being at the pole for a long time can do strange things to you. Being at the pole even for a short time can also do strange things. So this next passage occurs after Hallie's been there for 2 days, and she's alone in the galley again with one other man who's having lunch. She fetched herself a cup of chlorinated coffee and sat at a table by one of the windows to wait. Because it was light inside and so dark outside, she could see nothing through the glass. Leaning back, she gazed up at the strings of lights. More appeared to have burned out since her first visit to the galley. It was hard not to put her arms on the table and fall asleep right there, like napping in elementary school. A man at a nearby table was eating a hamburger and French fries, washing the food down with gulps of milk. She watched him chewing, listened to him chewing, and chewing, and chewing, mouth mostly open, making sounds like horses walking in mud. Finally, he swallowed, took another bite, and started chewing again, jaws working away beneath glazed eyes. She felt herself getting mad, understood dimly that the pole was wearing her down already, eroding her patience. She felt like getting up and smacking both of the man's bulging cheeks between clapping hands just to make him swallow. So eventually, the turn of events forces Hallie to go down into Old Pole, that creepy, offy, nasty place we just looked at. And so this is a description of her experience down there. 30 feet past the galley at Old Pole, she came to a T intersection, turned right, moved on carefully, the floor here littered with rusting cables, lumber, scrap metal. She came to what had been an entrance on her right, the frame all askew now, door hanging from one set of hinges. Painted in black on the door, Captain J.R. Leader, USN, Commanding Officer, South Pole, Antarctica, USA. Like Columbus claiming everything he could see and all he could not for the Queen, she thought. South Pole, Antarctica, USA. Different times. She wrenched the door back and shone her light into the room. 2 gray metal file cabinets, an overturned chair, and a massive old metal desk like the one in Grader's office up in the station. Her research partner, Fida, lay on top of the desk, naked, dead. His eyes were open, dulled by the gray haze of death. One arm lay underneath him. The other was stretched straight out, fingers spread wide as if trying to snatch something out of the air. Areas of his skin glistened, body moisture that had frozen and was reflecting her light, sweat from a struggle. He was so thin, she saw, skin over knobs and ridges of bone. His extreme cold weather gear, his underclothing and boots, all lay in a pile on the floor beside the desk. She ran her light over the room's ceiling. None of the cross beams had split, but all had unsettling downward curves. Didn't matter. She needed to get closer. She walked in, stood beside the body, started to look for wounds or signs of trauma. She saw nothing obvious at first, but then, just beneath Fida's head, a small reddish-black circle. Was that blood? She bent to look. A sharp noise from the dark passageway behind her, then a sound like giant hands clapping, ice cracking, timbers shattering. 1 second of dead silence and the ceiling collapsed. Her last thought was that it sounded like the avalanche on Denali just before it struck her. So to find out if she gets out, you got to buy the book. So that's the the backstory and some samples from the book, and I'm so glad you all came. So let's talk. Anybody got any questions? Yes, ma'am.
How did you choose Antarctica?
Well, the fellow Rodney Marks, as I said, when I read about what had happened to him, I thought, wow, that's a very interesting story. And then the more I learned about Antarctica, and more especially the more I learned about the research station, the more I liked it. It's really helpful if thrillers can be in very compacted, like Ships is a good example. Thriller writers like ships, Thriller writers like caves. And this place was especially intriguing because of all the stories of weird things that people do and that happen to people and stuff down there. It's the most extreme environment on Earth where people live year round. So the more I learned about it, the more this is a great place to have a mystery go.
How long did you spend there?
I've never been there. Actually. Oh, I'm sorry. So yeah. So the question is, how long did I spend there? And I've never been there.
Oh, so the pictures you got from somewhere.
Yeah, the National Science Foundation. Well, first of all, I should say there's a wealth of information about the South Pole. The National Science Foundation, which runs that station, maintains a full-time photographic archive, video, all kinds of stuff. From their point of view, it's for public relations. But there's also, they're called polies. These people who live down there are called polies. So they're poli blogs, poli diaries, poli videos, poli YouTubes, poli journals, poli diaries, and polies themselves that I talked to. So all those elements of research were available. I have been in environments, for example, in Alaska, where it was 40 below and where I put up with hurricane winds and altitude and things like that. So I experienced a number of the conditions that make the pole so difficult. Not 24-hour darkness for 8 months, but many of the others. So I felt comfortable writing about it from that point of view. Yeah. Sure. The question was, what role multiple drug-resistant bacteria play in this story? And in fact, they were the central evil, if you will, in the deep zone, which was about that. In this, there is another microorganism that's very, very important to the story, very key to the story, and it's something that the group of scientists who want to sort of depopulate the Earth are called triage, and they are working on a microorganism in the South Pole laboratories, which will help them control overpopulation. I don't want to give away too much, but that plays a role in this story.
Where were you in Alaska?
The question is, where was I in Alaska? I went up there several times. The first time I went up, I wanted to climb Mount McKinley, which is now called Denali. And my partner and I got to about 16,000 feet. We got stormed in, and we ran out of food and supplies and fuel and gas. And we kind of stubbed our toe on the mountain, as one person put it. We didn't get any higher than that. But a couple of years later, I went back and climbed a mountain called Sanford, which is in the Wrangell-St. Elias Wilderness. It's the 5th highest, I think, in the state. And we did get to the top of that one. So that was my second time in Alaska. And then I did some minor climbing around in the Chugach Range, which is kind of around Anchorage there. Yeah. So those were my Alaskan experiences. Loved it. Yeah, Virginia. The question was, what's my writerly routine, and do I outline? Thank you, Liz. Yeah, I told you guys I would need reminding. I like to write in the morning because there's something about morning energy for me that is just, it's luminous and it's effervescent and it's just amazing. So I try to write from 8 to noon or 8 to 1 o'clock and get first words down and then maybe do some revision in the afternoon. I do like to outline. It's really interesting. I went to a big writers convention in New York City. It's called Thriller Fest, and all the superstars down there, Lee Child and James Patterson and all these people. So I had this panel of them up there, and somebody asked them that question, do you guys outline? And to a person, every one of them said, no. I don't see how they do it unless they've been doing it so long and they're so conversant with the form that they can just do it almost automatically. I'm not there, so I have to outline. Always the book that comes at the end is not the book that gets outlined in the beginning, but it helps me avoid some dead ends and wasted time, I think. Yeah, so that's my practice.
Did your heroine have a personal life in the book, or can you describe her a little more?
I can, and she does have a personal life, actually.
Repeat the question.
The question is, does my heroine have a personal life in the book outside of her adventures? In the first book, she led an expedition that went down into this super cave. And one of the people that came on it was a man named Will Bowman. And he was there to provide security for this group of scientists. And he works for another shadowy entity in the intelligence community. He's a big guy, he's very dangerous, he's not very communicative. Perfect guy for her. Because she's tall, she's 5'10", she's very smart, she's not the most patient woman in the world. So strangely enough, they hit it off in the cave and they began a relationship, which continues in the book over here. And he drives her to the airport. I'll just give you a little teaser here. He drives her to the airport, and she tells him that she thought she was pregnant until the day before. And then they get up to the place where she has to hurry and take this flight, and they have this little flurry of, well, why didn't you tell me? Well, I didn't know if you knew about, you know, so, but it leaves this unresolved kind of tension that they have to leave and go apart. And there's no way she can communicate down at the South Pole because there's no, at the time she's there's no radio communication out. So the two of them separately are kind of trying to resolve this little problem about parenthood in their minds while they're separate and apart. And then at the end, they do come together and there is sort of a resolution. But they're romantically involved, and they will continue to be romantically involved throughout the series of the books, happily or unhappily, one way or another. Thank you all so much. Oh, there was
So you said you went to this Thriller Fest, and I happen to love Lee Child.
Ah.
I love his books. So I don't know yours, so I say so.
Uh-huh.
I didn't read it. Did they give you any pointers? Did you learn something there that was valuable?
The question is, did I learn anything of value at the Thriller Fest organizations? I can't tell you how valuable they were, because Lee Child and David Morrell, I mean, all the superstars give seminars and that you can go to. Amazing. I mean, worth their weight in gold. Because I was a nonfiction writer who came to fiction writing fairly late in my career. You know, these guys have been doing it for 30 years, and women, and they're brilliant. So I learned so much. I could talk for like 6 hours about all the stuff I learned from these people. And they're so successful, they don't have to worry about getting knocked out of their niches, you know, so they're very willing to share their secrets and their techniques and things like that. And Lee Child is the funniest speaker I have ever heard. He is hilarious. He's great. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really glad to see everybody. Thank you.